Yeah, so I'm Courtney. I'm a postdoc at Neuroscape. And so yes, Caoilainn cannot make it today, so I will just skip over her slides, but feel free to interrupt me as I go along, especially because this will be a little bit shorter without covering her slides. So I'll be talking to you today about some technology that we've recently developed at Neuroscape to both improve and assess cognitive functioning in kids. So of the various cognitive functions, a major focus at Neuroscape is cognitive control. So I'll first kind of give you some background about why we might want to look at cognitive control abilities in kids. So first, what do I mean by cognitive control? So cognitive control is comprised of a set of core abilities, including attention, so being able to sustain focus over time, inhibit distraction or impulsive responses. Also comprised of short-term or what sometimes people refer to as working memory, so being able to hold something in mind for short periods of time. And then finally, multitasking or goal management. So either doing two tasks at once or being able to switch between tasks. And a major focus of what I'll be talking about today are these attention functions. So why might we want to look at cognitive control abilities in kids? So here I'm showing you changes in cognitive control performance as a function of age. And what you'll see is that during both childhood and adolescence, the teenage years, there's still strong improvements in cognitive control abilities. So we might want to develop tools that can help us easily assess and improve these functions in kids. And then importantly, in addition to just our standard laboratory tasks, cognitive control is also related to real world outcomes in kids. So for example, scholastic performance. So here I'm showing you the relationship between math scores and cognitive control functions, where high positive values are indicative of a strong positive relationship between cognitive control and math scores. So if I'm scoring really well on cognitive control measures, I also have very strong math scores. And you can see this for a variety of ages, so children and adolescents. And so what you see for 3 different cognitive control functions, that there's a moderate to strong positive relationship between math scores and cognitive control.
How are you measuring cognitive control?
So this particular study used a standard battery, and their tests were things similar to like trail making and digit symbol. I think it was called the cognitive assessment scale. But you could imagine using a variety of other tests too. And I think traditionally, although this isn't my main area of expertise, but I think aspects of working memory are thought to relate to math performance a little bit more of those different functions that cognitive control is comprised of. And then you see a similar pattern for reading performance as well. So, so cognitive control is important to look at in kids. And this is more related to what Caoilainn would have been talking about cognitive control in other populations. So we'll just skip over that. So just a general roadmap for today. So I'll first talk about a technology that we've developed at Neuroscape to improve cognitive control in kids. And then Caoillainn would have talked about some tools we have to assess cognitive control. So we'll just kind of skip over those. Yes.
Talk about that.
Okay, so Joaquin will talk about ACE. So ACE is one of the tools that a mobile tool that we've developed to assess cognitive control in kids. And then I'll walk you through an in-depth example of how we're using those technologies in a randomized controlled trial that's just about to start in our lab. So I'll first talk about some technology that we have developed to improve cognitive control in kids. I'll be talking about Engage. This is a study that I'm leading. And then Caoillainn, who will eventually present about her study that's using a VR technology called Coherence. So we'll just talk about Engage today.
I'll try to fill in as much of the stuff that's missing, just because I have some insights on these things, and we can kind of go from there. Anyways, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So some background. So there's recent work in our group looking at meditation, showing that digital meditation can improve attention abilities in young adults. So at Neuroscape, this team developed an iPad digital meditation training called MediTrain. And here participants are encouraged to focus on their breath in the current moment and avoid both internal and external distraction. So this is a digital form of meditation that allows meditation to be a little more accessible to people rather than, say, like a meditation retreat, things like that. And importantly, and I'll talk about this for the other intervention that we developed, is that it was personalized. So if individuals were doing well and able to maintain focus on their breath, they would be challenged to then maintain their focus on their breath for a longer period. But if they weren't doing well or they felt that that level was challenging, then it would be reduced. So it was personalized and adaptable in real time. So to look at changes in attention, this group used a pretty standard attention task where you have to attend to stimuli, so this square in the top portion of the stimulus display, and inhibit responses to distractors. And to look at attention abilities, they looked at a metric called response time variability. So here, this is assessing the consistency of responses, where lower scores mean less variability, and that's indicative of greater attention and less mind wandering. So comparing the MetaTrain group to the placebo control group before and after training, they found that attention abilities were improved in the meditation group, and there was no change in this metric in the placebo group. So that line of work, as well as other work, suggests that meditation can improve aspects of attention, so one of our core cognitive control functions in kids. However, traditional focused breath meditation is pretty challenging for populations of children, so especially in terms of fun, and then the kids might not be very motivated to engage in the training and potentially not have as many benefits. So to this end, we developed an iPad game called Engage. So this is an adaptive mindfulness attention training that has elements of traditional video games that we think would be really important for kids. And then over time, the kids are progressively immersed into a mindfulness setting. So the main task of Engage is very much like that attention task that I described, but just been gamified. So here kids respond to target bugs on the iPad, and they inhibit their responses to distracting poison bugs. So kids start off in this immersive, fast-paced context that's very much like a traditional video game. And then over time, they are slowly immersed into something we call engage mode, and this is our mindfulness context. So it's visually sparse, so kids can only hear the bugs, and it's much slower paced, and I'll show examples of those too. So here is an example of this first immersive, fast-paced context that kids see initially, very much like a traditional video game. Let's see. So here are the target bugs, and you're just responding to them, putting them in your basket to collect points for. You'll eventually see here are distracting target bugs that we inhibit a response for. If you accidentally hit a poison bug, you lose all the bugs in your basket, and then you don't get the points for them. And over time, it becomes faster. But you can see it's fast-paced, much like a traditional video game context. And there are differences in the environment, and you have all these sounds associated with the environment, and you're kind of riding through on this dragonfly collecting bugs. So very similar to what I alluded to for MetaTrain is this game also has real-time personalized adaptability. So here, if kids are doing well, the game will become more challenging for them. And if they're not doing well, the game will get a little bit easier. So in that way, we're able to deliver a personalized challenge level to have kids at the appropriate challenge to encourage motivation and just engagement in the game. So not too hard, not too easy, and that progresses over time. So the two main features that are adaptable in this immersive context are the bug speed and the similarity. So as the game becomes more difficult, the bugs fly faster, you have to respond quicker to catch them. And then the bugs also become more similar to each other, both in terms of their auditory and their visual features. So I'll next show a video of engage mode. So this is our mindfulness context. So once kids get enough points, they're launched into engage mode where they can only hear the bugs and they cannot see them. And it's, again, much slower paced. So kids are encouraged to play engage mode with their eyes closed. So that was a poison bug. You wouldn't respond to that. You'll hear a good bug. Yeah, so you just tap on the screen when you hear a good bug. And you can, it's definitely much slower paced than the traditional video game setting. So because of this, because it's much slower paced, there are many more opportunities for mind wandering. So to be successful in engage mode and catch those target bugs, you really need to employ these mindfulness attention strategies to do well. Okay, so then again, just like the other context, here we have personalized adaptability that's independently adapted. And the main features here are bug frequency and volume. So over time, if you're doing well, the bugs become even less frequent. So again, many more opportunities for mind wandering and the need to employ mindfulness strategies to do well. And then also bug volume. So because they become much fainter over time, so you need to maintain attention to actually hear them and distinguish them from the bad bugs. And so importantly too, over time, if you're doing well, you spend more time in engage mode. So starting off, a round of engage mode could be about 30 seconds. But if you're doing well, say towards the end of the training, you're in engage mode for several minutes at a time. Okay, so this is maybe where Joaquin can say some things about coherence.
Sure, you mind if I
jump
in a couple questions?
Sure.
So one thing when I'm thinking about engage that I find interesting is I'm curious how the connection is really established between this and mindfulness, right? So you have an attention training game, right? But I didn't see you actually demonstrate that it improves mindfulness or is actually touching that construct. Is there any outcome measures you did or something you did that actually show it's utilizing mindfulness type attention rather than just regular selective attention?
Yeah, so we actually aren't directly assessing any. So I will talk about our outcome measures in a little bit when I describe the study that we're doing right now. So no actual measures of mindfulness, but what we do think, and I'll touch on this later, is that we could use the amount of time spent in engage mode as a potential moderator of our outcome. So the kids who are able to sustain their attention in that slower paced context better are the ones that ultimately improve their attention abilities. But so one of our main attention outcome measures, we've shown to improve with both traditional video games like NeuroRacer and also our mindfulness attention. So something that we've been thinking about too is maybe a follow-up study would be to have kids play engage where they're kind of slowly immersed into something that's like mindfulness, and then give them something like MetaTrain, and are those kids better able to do a traditional focused breath meditation after they've kind of been eased into it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems, MetaTrain seems a little bit more direct. I would also argue that it's unclear if people are actually meditating when they do that, or they're actually being mindful rather than just doing that task. But that it's debatable, I think, based on the evidence I've seen so far. I think, though, just to be interesting or a little bit intriguing and not be totally challenging on this idea, I mean, I think it's possible, right? Mindfulness requires a certain type of attention, right? And even if you're doing tasks that are not mindfulness, but improve attention, right, or improve your capacity to pay attention, that could improve your ability or increase your capacity to be mindful, right? But it doesn't necessarily. It almost feels like these things are doing that, and it has the potential to increase mindfulness, but I don't necessarily see, like I said, I opened the question, I'm not sure I see the direct connection yet.
Yeah, so we could definitely think about assessing mindfulness, some sort of measure like that. So yeah, that could be an interesting future direction. Yeah, and it's just kind of, the idea is, it's definitely not traditional mindfulness, but we're trying to do something that's a little more engaging for kids to ease them into that, to make it more accessible. And then perhaps maybe they are more ready for something like MetaTrain. Where the direct links with focus, breath, mindfulness are a little clearer.
Yeah, I know. I agree.
Yeah.
You guys probably are touching on some skills that are important to sort of bootstrap people into proper meditation. I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let's see
what happens here.
Okay.
So this will be good. So I think the idea here that Caoillainn would have been saying, so imagine me with an Irish accent, would be great. And the idea here really is that there is a relation between rhythm and reading. in that the more variable you are in terms of just rhythmic tapping, you tend to be much worse in terms of reading words and such. There's also been known associations between cognitive control abilities, the same ones that Courtney mentioned, in terms of working memory, attention, what have you, and reading abilities in the first place. So this kind of ends up being like this triangulated thing between, there seems to be issues with reading and rhythm and executive function where all seem to be associated. And in our group, we really tried to think about how can we best leverage these associations to try to better either assess and or improve reading function. The hope is that by proxy, if we improve cognitive abilities as a whole, potentially we have to improve these reading abilities just at the same level. Just not by targeting them specifically, but just by improving cognitive abilities in the first place. So that's kind of the impetus we have here in terms of the techniques that we're trying to do here is try to come up with a way of improving rhythmic function and abilities in the first place with the hopes that it might, by proxy, again, improve cognitive control abilities and subsequently reading abilities as a whole. So here is coherence. So this is an adaptive rhythm trainer. So on stage, what you're going to see right now is the drummer for the Grateful Dead, if I'm not mistaken, Mickey Hart, who is going to be playing this virtual reality game. So coherence is a game that's kind of like, let's see, band together. No, not band together. That's what's that? No, it's more. I'm trying to think of the other one. Rock band.
Rock band.
Thank you. So it's more like rock band. Okay. So what you're seeing here is somebody with controllers in their hands. They're basically trying to stay on rhythm. Okay. And while it differs from this is one, the game was developed not to be fun. We're specifically going to push upon certain frequencies and circuits in the brain that are related to rhythmic processing, especially like anticipatory cues and what have you. So this can be played, you'll see in VR, but obviously we're developing so it can be done on a tablet and go from there. So let's see what happens here. So this little sticks are Mickey's playing, and he's just basically tapping when he sees a little balls hit the circle. The music stems are made by our friends Thievery Corporation, who made original music for this game. And again, the main thing here is just trying to stay on beat, but obviously because we know this is rhythmic, we have situations here, people have to basically be on beat, off by one, and things like that. So we can kind of change the tempo, the complexity, and the precision of these kind of things to make it adaptive and kind of see if we can get something out of this. Ooh. There you go. Look at that. Go to the next one.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm reaching it. So, and then the idea here is to see if anything changed. We have two different technologies. The one on this first one's called ACE, an adaptive cognitive evaluation. This is something our group at Neuroscape has been developing for, gosh, almost like 5 years now. And the idea behind this is that a lot of different ways of assessing cognitive control abilities, whether you do it online or through different companies or what have you, a lot of them are okay or expensive or terrible, frankly, and you don't have access to the data a lot of times. So what our group at Neuroscape has been doing for a long time now has been trying to think of a way to leverage the different adaptive algorithms we've done in all these interventions that Courtney mentioned, and you'll learn more about some of the ones that Jeff talks about in a moment. But try to leverage those not just for improving attention function, but to better assess this function in the first place. So something could be done multiple times and be confident in our test reliability, try to wipe out practice effects and know that if I did this, whether on day 1, day 31, or day 301, we're not just looking at practice effects, rather we're looking at stable performance on this that's related to cognitive abilities and kind of go from there. So ACE was developed with that in mind, again, testing the same things that Courtney mentioned, attention, working memory and goal management, or cognitive flexibility, what have you. And again, the idea here is we're looking to utilize this technology specifically for this population of folks with dyslexia to see, all right, let's just see if they have impairments in cognitive abilities as previous studies suggested. And then let's try to assess how does that relate to their reading performance in the first place. The other thing, as we mentioned was a second ago, is VR training coherence. Well, we have to find a way to measure their rhythmic abilities. This is one thing that's sad, just to, I know this is coming up, obviously.
Yeah. So this is basically the
version of the TOVA.
Yeah.
That would be gamified. And again, this ACE in general is just very adaptive. It's engaging quick. All these tests are between 2 to 4 minutes, and the whole battery takes about 45 minutes. That's like 12 different tasks. So it's really nice. You can do a quick assessment of executive function or cognitive control abilities on a tablet or phone or laptop, on anything you want, and you kind of go from there. If you want more questions on ACE, just holler at me, we can go from there. So rhythmicity. So one of the things we came up, we realized that if we were going to start training people on rhythm, we need to find a way to assess the rhythmic abilities in the first place. And so this was led by Dr. Ted Zanto in our group and some others, come up with a way to better assess rhythm abilities in the first place. And so they came up with this rhythmicity thing that was kind of related to what we showed you a moment ago, and that looks much fancier in VR. But in this case, it's trying to find how each person's rhythm abilities can be measured in terms of being on beat, off beat, asynchronous, what have you, kind of go from there. So this is a game you can see there. People are simply tapping when the green is at each of the level sides of the screen, and how well they're able to stay on beat and the variability associated with the time. We're trying to find out how rhythmic they are. And so this paper got published, and musicians actually believe it. So we kind of like that. And we have a lot of different variations of this. So it's kind of an interesting way of just assessing this and going from there. Let's see what else we got. So,
yes.
It's you?
Yeah. So now I'll talk in depth about how we're using those technologies, so both to improve and assess cognitive function, and 2 example studies that are going on in our lab. We're about to start. So I'll first talk about ENGAGE. So for the in-lab study of ENGAGE, we are assessing healthy adolescents, so defined as 12 to 16-year-olds. And we'll have 20 participants in each of our groups, so the ENGAGE group and the control groups, and I'll talk more about those control groups in a bit. So I'll next walk you through a typical timeline of what a participant would experience participating in one of our studies. So they first come into our lab for a set of baseline assessments, so 3 separate visits, and I'll talk about some of those outcomes in the next slide. So there are 3 separate visits that occur over 1 to 2 weeks, where we get really detailed information about what their abilities are at the starting point. They're then randomized to one of our groups, and they'll take home an iPad and play one of our games at home for 30 days over 6 to 8 weeks. And we monitor their gameplay remotely just to make sure they're being compliant and playing the game as designed. They then come back into the lab and repeat all of those same measures that that we conducted at baseline, and this will be used to assess the changes in those in cognitive functions as a result of the training. They then come back into the lab 6 months later to examine the persistence of any of these changes. How long do we still see those changes 6 months after stopping the training? So now I'll talk about some of our outcome measures. So our primary outcome measure, so this is the measure that we'll look at first, that we have really strong hypotheses for ENGAGE improving, is that attention measure that I talked about in the context of MetaTrain. So here we'll be looking at changes in one of our core cognitive control functions, attention, using this task, and then looking at reaction time variability as well. We then have a set of exploratory measures. So because we are hypothesizing to improve attention, a core cognitive control function, you might imagine that we could improve other related cognitive control functions as well, because they're kind of all under this core cognitive control umbrella, and they tend to be related to each other. So we'll also be looking at measures of short-term or working memory and measures of impulsivity. We also will be recording neuroimaging data while participants perform these tasks, so both EEG and MRI, to look at the underlying neural changes that are associated with these behavioral changes. We'll also be using ACE, the battery that Joaquin described, to have just a really broad view of a lot of different cognitive control functions using this digital assessment tool. And then finally, we'll also be looking at real-world abilities and how they might change as a function of training, so specifically math and reading performance. So now I'll talk about our control group. So we want to show that any of those changes in our outcomes are specific to ENGAGE training. So to do that, we have 2 control groups. We first have a placebo control group called Boing. So participants take home an iPad and play this game called Boing for the same 30 days of training over the 6 to 8 week period. So this game also has audio-visual features, but it doesn't have any of those core meditation mindfulness components that we think are going to be important for changing attention abilities. We then also have kind of a form of a no contact group that we are calling our low dose ENGAGE group. So they just play the game twice over 6 to 8 week periods. And this will control for any changes in measures that we see that are just a result of playing a new iPad game for a 30-day period.
What did you remove from that? Did you remove the adaptivity?
We know it's still adaptive. They just play 2 times. So they play right after they do their baseline measures, and they play once more in the middle. And kind of the reason why we chose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But you could imagine too, so maybe something more like, which would be more like a mechanistic control, would be to remove the adaptability and see if there are, fewer changes or something like that.
Okay, that's interesting manipulation.
Yeah, so it's similar to something that Joaquin did with his neuroeraser study, and we think that the 2 days will actually help maintain the expectancy and cover story of us looking at improvements. So if you have a true no contact group, participants probably aren't expecting that we're really looking at improvement or something like that. But here we would just say you're playing this game twice, and we're going to examine how playing this game twice can improve your or change your cognitive abilities.
And you feel people bought that?
So we have not. So this study,
enough?
So this study is about to begin. So we will be so we will be assessing that because that's definitely important. And that actually ties in nicely with my next slide. So we have a placebo-controlled group called Boing, and you might wonder how we came to select Boing as the appropriate placebo control. So to do that, we did formal expectancy matching in 18 to 20-year-olds to actually quantify how much participants expect to change their abilities as a function of playing these games. So what we did is we showed participants either videos of Engage or Boing and asked them how much they would expect to change their performance on a bunch of our outcome measures. So here I'm showing you the results from our key attention measure, where lower scores are indicative of greater improvement. So what you'll see is that for participants who saw Engage versus Boing, that they were very well matched in how much a participant would expect to change on those measures as a function of playing that game. And next, I'm showing you just an example from one of our exploratory measures, the short-term working memory measure. So again, the groups are really well matched on how much a participant would expect to change as a function of playing this game. And then in addition, we also asked about general changes in cognitive and emotional well-being, so not tied to any particular task. So here, higher values represent greater amounts of change. So for example, the ability to avoid distraction, or emotional well-being. And the critical thing here is that the groups are really well matched on how much you might expect to improve. So just general differences in expectancy are a lot less likely to drive any of those cognitive changes that we see. So because of this, we think that Boing is a really good placebo control. And we'll also be assessing this same type of expectancy on changing with the cognitive measures in our actual participants to confirm the same pattern of results. Okay, so then I'll just close the Engage section with a little bit of pilot data that we have. So here I'll be showing the progression of time spent in Engage mode, our mindfulness context, because we think that's one of those key outcome measures, a moderator of our outcomes, one of our key game features. So here I'll be showing you data from 4th to 8th graders, pilot data that we collected in collaboration with our education neuroscience program at Neuroscape. So here kids played a differing number of Engage sessions. They didn't play for the full 30 days. So what I'm showing you here on the x-axis, maybe this will go away, is the number of sessions those kids played, so 7 to 14. And then on the y-axis is the amount of time they were in Engage mode during that last session. So what you'll see is that there's a general positive relationship between the number of sessions and the time spent in Engage mode, but that there's a lot of individual variability as well. So for example, this individual was in Engage mode for a little more than 4 minutes after only 7 sessions, and then this individual took 11 sessions to get to that same level. And importantly, the time spent in Engage mode is a function of that personalized adaptability. So the individuals, if they're spending more time in Engage mode, that means that they're doing well in that context and able to employ those attention abilities. And then I'll next show you pilot data from a participant who played 30 days of Engage. It was me. So on the x-axis, you'll see the training training day, so day 1 through 30, and on the y-axis is the amount of time I was in engage mode for that training session. So what you'll see is I started off engage mode about 1 minute, and then over time just gradually progressed. Towards the end of training, I was in engage mode for almost a third of the 30-minute session. And so we think that this could potentially, the amount of time spent in engage mode or kind of the trajectory of that change over training could be one of an interesting moderator variable. So maybe individuals who are able to spend more time in engage mode, those might be the individuals who improve more in their attention abilities. Okay, so.
Real quick, I had a question about Boyd.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys have any suspicion or hypotheses that that may move cognitive measure?
Yeah, so we have thought about that. So it's really well matched in terms of expectancy, but we do think, and it doesn't have any meditation or mindfulness components, but I do think that playing that game for a 30-minute period over time will engage some sustained attention abilities. So that, yes, that is something we've thought of, but we do have that low dose group that could potentially control for any of those changes, where we wouldn't expect to see that in the low dose group. Yeah. So then next we have a similar timeline for coherence. So this is Caoilainn's in-lab study that she'll be conducting maybe sometime this year. Yeah.
I'll jump in for some of this.
Okay.
And this will have a similar design that Courtney's, just with baseline measure, very similar, 30 days of training, post measures, and a 6-month follow-up. So again, this will be both a VR and a VR tablet control game. Some of the main outcome measures, again, is the rhythmicity one we looked at earlier. That kind of gives that idea of temporal attention. Exploratory things would be including their auditory processing. ACE, again, some neuroimaging, and especially reading abilities, because obviously this is a dyslexia study. We hope that the reading abilities would get better at the very least, but that's exploratory because, right, this is the first phase of pilot to find out if anything happens. At the very least, if a rhythm and training game should improve rhythmic ability, so that should really be the forefront, which is why temporal attention is highlighted here as a primary outcome measure. As for the control games, they're still trying to decide which one they want to use. There's 2 different options. One is Zentrist, which is kind of like Tetris, but I guess shaped with different spatial components, and the other one is Worder, which is kind of like a vocabulary jumble type game that they'll be doing for 30 days at home training, and they haven't decided quite yet what we're going to do next. But again, the idea is we'll try to figure out what these things do in these populations and in a real world setting. We're also going to be doing this. Oh, that's you. That's us.
Yeah.
Dyslexia.
That's us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just some future direction. So in addition to carrying out the studies that I described, so our in-lab engage study is starting just now. But later down the line, we'll also be looking at some of these interventions in new populations. So we might use engage in the dyslexia study as well as an active control. So potentially not improving reading abilities as much as coherence, but something that we think will improve cognitive functions in kids. So there is some benefit to it rather than just a placebo control that we think might not improve cognitive abilities. And then we have some studies that we are conducting in real world settings. So the first is a mobile engage study in collaboration with the Boys and Girls Club in Monterey County. So here participants don't come into lab, they play, engage at home. We don't ever interact with them in a lab setting, and then they do ACE before and after to assess those cognitive changes. So this is kind of the first step to really increase the accessibility of our interventions, where you could imagine someday they're just available on the App Store, and we don't have to interface with participants, and just makes them more accessible to people in the general population. And then there's also a thought to do the iPad version of coherence in school settings as well. Okay, and then just some thank you to funding, people at Neuroscape, as well as the Dyslexia Center, and then UC San Diego, Joe T, who helped with the Engage study.
Yeah. Thanks, folks. We'll take some questions.